Okay, so welcome everyone to Arc Pro Basics, and this is a beginner's guide to using ArcGIS Pro and different tools associated with ArcGIS Pro. So keep in mind it's a basics course where you're going to see multitude of tools, the platform, and then also some avenues that you can go and use data mining techniques and integrate that into a project that you have running. So this is about a 2-hour workshop. Incrementally, we'll have sessions for questions and then Q&A sessions, but also a chance for all of you to catch up, people that are following along. This recording will be sent out to all participants and who have registered for this particular workshop, so you'll have access to go back and check out the recording, and then also some other applicable materials that might be useful for you. Okay, so first and foremost, my name is Dan Cronin, and I'm an assistant professor of landscape architecture here at the University of Idaho. So welcome to everybody here. I'm glad to see that there's some participation here, and I'm interested to towards the end of the session we'll have kind of a Q&A session about what you're interested in using ArcGIS Pro for, and then kind of what you're thinking about pursuing with your geospatial interests. Let me hide some of these meeting controls. So let's go ahead and let's get started here.
I don't know if you're trying to show something on the screen, but there's like big blocks that are kind of black with lines through them.
Let's see. And can you see, how's that looking? Can you see the discovering the world through GIS?
Yeah, now there was like two big blocks over that screen that was kind of cutting it off and covering it.
Gotcha. Okay, so those are just the floating controls. So I'll turn off those so you can all see the screen there. Cool. Thanks for the heads up there. Let's see. So let's go ahead and let's get started, and we'll talk about the utility of the program, and then we'll also talk about kind of a workflow and associated workflows to move through this. Before we do that, did Bruce Godfrey is the GIS data manager for the University of Idaho. I didn't know if you had any comments before we get started here today, Bruce.
No, I don't have anything to add, Dan. Just great to see everyone, and I look forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's see. So we should be in full screen mode here, and we're able to, and you shouldn't have anything that's popping up here on the screen. If there is, let me know through the chat, and I'll try to use the magnifier as much as possible to get to kind of like detailed views for whenever we jump into ArcGIS Pro. Okay, so ArcGIS, let's talk about GIS to begin with. So a GIS is a geographical information system, right? So Esri's GIS or Arc Pro tool is just a tool to put together a lot of different data sets and data layers. So whenever I think about it and explain it to people, I explain it like a hamburger, right? You have all of these different data layers broken up into different classes, features, and data types. Some of you on the call are probably all too familiar with different data platforms, but keep in mind, ArcGIS and Esri's tools, they're not the only one, right? And there are other tools that can do, a different job that are used for a different utility for processing data analysis or spatial analysis. There's QGIS, there's RStudio and RTools. There's different platforms that you can use to get into the scripting to create your own tools with this. Arc Pro is really great about getting this to an online platform, and it's kind of an all-in-one tool for data analysis, spatial analysis, and then also representation. Okay, so in today's workshop, we're going to walk you through a little bit of that. So just a kind of a taste of this this hamburger. Okay, so whenever we're thinking about these layers of the hamburger, here you have different types of data. You have customers, for example, streets, parcels, elevation data, biophysical data, but also social data that's associated with compiling all of these forms together. As a composite here, this last map that you have at the bottom, or data set, right, if you will, is a composite of all of these layers together. And that's where we can start to see our data analysis slash what this looks like altogether to look for suitable locations for different interventions in planning. Just to also mention, I also teach a GIS applications in landscape planning and associated kind of tools. So it's getting to whenever we're going to development and planning assumptions or where not to develop, you can use these kind of tools to make those assumptions and get to them fairly quickly. So you have different data types and data sources with specific associated attributes. So attributes, they're a way to say, or they're a way to define different information and different information systems that are connected to that polygon set or that raster set. And we'll talk about that and show you examples of that in our workshop here today. Primarily, there's 4 different data types that we use. We have actually 2 main ones, but 3 inside of that, and then 1 another type. So that's point, line, polygon, and grid data. And that's divided up in between raster and vector data. They take different forms and have different file types, but primarily vector data, we're dealing with polygons and shape files. Those of you are familiar with Illustrator, compound and complex paths, and then also raster data, which we would just commonly refer to as grids. We'll show you how to process both of those data types today in the quick presentation. So you can run through different types of analyses and sets of analyses depending on what kind of data you're working with. So for example, in land use planning and in GIS analysis, we typically use it for suitability analysis. Suitability analysis, it's a way to look for best locations or the worst locations of certain types of interventions. So that could be, the best locations to put the next 100 acres or hectares of residential development, right? Or the best locations to, have gravel extraction or not have gravel extraction, or the best places to preserve high quality habitat, right? So GIS can be, and GIS tools can be used for a number of interventions to make this happen. But keep in mind that this analysis and this evaluation is based off of that root word of evaluation, right? Value. When you associate these maps and the data that's associated with them, or the attributes that are associated with them, you as the GIS user place the value in those systems in particular, and then also the associated data. So we'll show you what that looks like here in the next hour or so. You have different types of grids. Here's another example of when you have grids and also data sets and through polygons when you're creating assumptions based off of walkability or suitability of some kind of intervention. Like in this case, with this project, they were looking for the best location for a wastewater station, right? That is based off of previous data and having those as an overlap. So whenever you come up with a combination or a composite of this, you can see that this hamburger with all 3 of these data sets together can say, here are the most suitable locations, highly suitable or not suitable locations for whatever intervention you're producing here. Okay, enter the hugag. Okay, the hugag, it's just a mythical creature. Okay, let's simplify this a little bit. by talking about this mythical creature that in early lumber camps in towards the turn of the century, people were, worried about this creature, this mythical creature coming in. Now, through reports in the 30s and the 40s, they said they liked a certain type of habitat. Okay, so if we were to, really apply this through a geospatial analysis and look, okay, where are the best locations for this type of this mythical creature, this animal, right? You can essentially make that assumption through GIS maps. Okay, let's use a data type called raster grid here. So based off of literature, and this is kind of hilarious because they've looked at this in the literature to say that hoogags like gentle slopes or southerly aspects, and then also lower elevations, right? So when you combine all three of those data types together, you can come up with the best habitat to say, okay, well, this is going to be the best habitat to restore these species, for these species to go to, or this is where they're going to kind of like flock to for their home range, right? And you could do that for a lot of different numbers of species. We've done that for sage grouse in Magic Valley. Suitability for the kit fox. We're looking at that for red band trout in different parts of southern Idaho now. So you can do that for species, but you can also apply those evaluations and suitability analysis to landscape and planning interventions like development or lack thereof. Let's see. So let's talk about these grid cells just a little bit more. If we're to take this, mythical creatures and best quality habitat attributes and apply those through a suitability mapping analysis, let's see what that looks like whenever we translate this. So if we're looking at the best habitat as in green, right? And then the bad or the worst habitat as in red, you can create binary maps with two values, right? Binary meaning like a bicycle having two different values, right? Two tires, where one is good and the other is bad. Okay, so if we take all of these data types, and it looks like there's about 12 here, and then we break those up and classify them and reclassify them into two different types, one being good and 0 being bad, or white being good in this case, and then red being bad, right? Then you can do that for each of those data types, like slope, right? Because they like low slopes. Aspects, they like southerly aspects. So you can create a set of binary maps. In this case, we have 3 binary maps, 1, 2, and 3. Now, if you were to combine those together, right, you can see that if we say, okay, is this the best location? This point that we selected, is this the best location for this habitat? In this case, no, because that overlapping grid cell does not work, right? It has one red bad habitat kind of aspect with it, or attribute with it. But if we were to move this over here, right? If we were to select an area outside or over here, you could see that that would be good, right? So it all depends on how you display this information through visualization. Now, that's just a binary question. That's a yes or no question. If we just multiplied all of these together, 1 times 0, right? That's going to give us a 0. Now, what if we were to add these together? Okay, so if we just took a binary suitability map and said, okay, let's multiply all of those together, of course you're going to get 0, right? So that's a 0, right? And that means that some are good, some are bad. But what if you took a range? What if you ranked these into a range and added them together, right? To where 1 is being good, this case is being good as well, this binary, and then this one is being bad. You're still going to get values in a range from 1 to 2, right? So at least there's a range saying, okay, there's the best habitat here in these white or gray grid cells. There's better habitat, and there's also marginal habitat here. But then you can also see the red, this deep red, as being bad habitat or the worst locations for the hugag to live, right? And again, this can be a number of different tools that you can use for representation. This can be, or interventions. This can be locations for residential. This can be locations for new development, places to restore floodplain, a number of different things. Best places to have a bike lane in a city, right? So let's look a little bit more into this. Whenever you're depicting this information out, you want to have different visualization types to be compelling, right? And this is something that's changing using Arc Pro tools, as you have data visualization and representation that you can show a lot of this information quickly, but also as through 3D tools. Okay. Towards the end of the workshop today, we'll show you some 3D tools and how to make these cool and interesting drawings with a little bit of post-processing. They can be good, you know, as just a representation that doesn't have associated data, right? Sort of like for a flyer that isn't, you know, necessarily, it is compelling, but it's not necessarily smart. There's no legend here, all of this fun stuff. But it can attract or bring people into to your designs, and then also your analyses and what you want to show here. The other thing that you can do is you can start to associate attributes with some of the data that you're running and show different data types to take, you know, these typical kind of bar graphs or histograms, and then change those into something more compelling, like through an axon. So, you know, we typically do that in data analyses and representation as landscape architects. But if that's something of interest for you, we apply that through different types of data visualization techniques, and I can show that in a little bit of that in this workshop. But I have the LARC 395/504 course for landscape architects, where we walk through specifically data use types, and then also different forms of analyses for visualization. Specifically for planning. That's not to say that it isn't open to everybody else. There's also the LARC 495 class, which is specifically for a process called geodesign. And that's for planners, landscape architects, even there's a lot of architects and people in virtual technology and design that jump into that as well. And then lastly, you know, just as a quick simulation, here are some of the tools that you can produce to combine all of these things together using ArcGIS tools. So for example, this is popping up here. Remove some of these floating controls. So what you're able to do with this weighted raster overlay is produce these web apps, right? Where you can jump into different simulations, but it's live data that you can share with people, your clients, your stakeholder groups, your classes, you know, whatever is useful for you to essentially transfer this data to a group of people. So for example, if I'm walking through this, I can go through that suitability analysis here. Hang on one second. I'm going to have to sign in as a user. Do a thing. Apologies for the delay there. Okay, so if I walk through a suitability analysis, sort of like what I did with the hugag, or showed you all with the hugag earlier, but let's get more specific here. Let's do this for Magic Valley, Idaho. So if I go into a suitability analysis, I can take different types of data. I can say, okay, I want to include biodiversity priority index, which maybe some of you have run into that or looked at that in your ecology courses. Elevation, human modified, land cover, and slope. And let's rank all of those at 20%. But let's also kind of range each of those to say, okay, if I go into this and I say biodiversity, I can change some of these numbers to be to depict what I want to show, or what a stakeholder group would want to show. So this is putting the value in evaluation. So you can mark up all of those. You could say, okay, everything that's a lower elevation would be useful for, whatever type of intervention that I'm putting in here. So say, for example, if we're looking at best quality habitat for a species in this particular area, let's say even sage grouse, you can start to, associate these numbers. Like if we're looking at human modified, if it's, being low modified, right, then that's probably not the best location for where sage grouse would want to go. So if I wanted to put that as or wanted to live, if I put that as low modified as highly valued, then I can almost switch these to say, okay, these are going to be the best locations for this type of habitat. Highly modified wouldn't be the best location for habitat for sage grouse in this particular range that we're showing here. Land cover, kind of the same thing. Polar ice, obviously that's going to be an exclusion layer. Developed is going to be extremely low, so we'll put that as a 0. Barren land, we'll put that as a 4. Forest, we'll put that a little bit lower, but shrubland, right, is probably going to be pretty high here. Same thing with grassland, that's also, let's put that as a 7. Agriculture, also very low. And then, well, let's put it at a 2. And then, wetlands, for example, also not as great because sage grouse do not particularly like wetlands. It's going to be important that you base a lot of these analyses on data and also peer-reviewed science. Okay, let's go ahead and let's run this suitability tool to see what we get. So everything that is higher quality habitat in this case, and this is just a quick analysis, is rated are put into green here, where a lower quality habitat is at a red, right? So if we zoom out to the entire state, you can see, okay, here's what we're looking for, and here's the best locations, but also the worst locations to put that in. You can deliver this, and this is just a quick mock-up for demonstration purposes. Obviously, there's a lot of sagebrush in here that the habitat would sage grouse habitat would go for. However, if I were giving this to a stakeholder group, right, where they can make their own assumptions here, that's where the secret really lies. You can get them to actually go in and draw and almost take a survey of where those best locations for habitat can be, right? And they can export these features and showcase this information with the rest of the group. So this is all through an online platform, through ArcGIS Online. But to get to all of this, to create this, you have to have a little bit of knowledge and background information using ArcGIS Pro tools. Okay, with that said and done, let's go ahead and let's evoke ArcGIS Pro, and then we'll talk about some basic navigation, but also where to find data for data mining. Okay, so first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you where you can download ArcGIS software. As a University of Idaho student, you're able to access and download different tools and authorize them through this platform here up on the screen. That's through the library, and ArcGIS Pro is a download here. I'm going to go ahead and share this in the chat so everybody can see it and get to it if you'd like. So you can download the software from there, and it can be really, let's see, let me go ahead and hide floating controls. So it can be, you want to make sure that it's updated and up to speed with what's going on, or the current version, and we'll show you how to do that here in a second. So I have my version downloaded and the most recent version. So I'm just going to go ahead and evoke ArcGIS Pro here. You can see that I have an ArcMap version for GIS. ArcMap is the dated version of Pro. Pretty much everything is up on ArcGIS Pro here now. So those of you who are ArcGIS Map users, the basic or the gist of it is it's just a user interface change. So I'm going to go ahead and open up ArcGIS Pro here. And just from cold, we'll show you some basic navigation and where to bring in data types and data forms. Okay, So this is right whenever you open up ArcGIS Pro, you're going to have this to start out with. You have your open pane, which will be all of your previous projects. You can open current projects, but you'll probably see here that you have map, catalog, global scene, and local scene. I'm going to go ahead and just open up here just with a map. And I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to tell it where that location is that I want to write it to. So I'm going to send this to my desktop. And you can see that I'm mapped here to some remote servers. I want to go ahead and save this to my desktop here, and I'm going to put that under this workshop. At the file level, I'm just going to click here once, and then go ahead and hit OK. And I'm going to call this Arc Pro Basics. For this, I can have spaces. I can also have capital letters here. And but however, in these naming conventions, it's going to be for raster analysis. It's going to be really important that you're thinking about the naming conventions and making sure that even at the file level that it does not have spaces or gaps. So, for example, you see here. Bring it to the magnifier. So if you're looking here and you see that Arc Pro space basics space workshop, that's going to be a problem later on. So you want to make sure that you have a file type that does not have spaces in that. So I'm going to write to my desktop. I'm going to select this. Okay. And then just at this level, I'm going to go ahead and write there. Okay. And I'll go ahead and hit that. That's fine. I'll go ahead and hit OK. Great. Okay, let me go back to the magnifier. Awesome. So this is what you're going to see whenever you open up this file. You're going to have this platform here, which is just showing an aerial base map. And then you also have some different panes. So when you first open this, it's going to look a little daunting, but that's okay. We'll explain all of this. So at the top, you have this ribbon, which is where you control how to save your files, right? So if I zoom in here, I have this top where I can go to create new projects. I can also open existing projects that I have. And then I can also go back and undo certain commands to go back in time a little bit. I also have the project tab here, which I can start to save as, I can open, I can look at different versions, right? So if I wanted to update or update my software, the current version that we have here on March the 29th, 2021 is 2.7.2. There's new patches that open up all the time, and then that are updated quite frequently. So you want to make sure that your version is up to speed. So I check this usually about once a month. You can also add in different third-party plugins here. You can also change your portals and then also close out projects. Okay, so you have that project tab here in this command ribbon, and then you also have map, insert, analyses, view, imagery, and share. Okay, let me go to my magnifier. So the other thing that you have here is you have this what's called the contents pane. Okay, think of your contents pane as all of your layers and all of your data that you're having in this particular project, right? So I can start to insert a lot of data, change the stacking order and how it is displayed, or also change the way that it's represented for different lists of data sources, or what you want to be selectable, or what you want to be editable. Okay, so that's primarily your contents pane. You also have over here your catalog pane, which is in Arc Map. That's kind of the difference here. Is Arc Map, you had a totally separate program to be able to run that, but in Arc Pro, it's all in one user interface. So you have Arc Catalog that you're able to add in data from this location. Underneath here, you can jump to different types of data forms. So, for example, if you accidentally close out your Arc catalog, you can go back into it from, let's see, let me click around a little bit. I always forget specifically where it is. It's under view. It's the catalog pane. So if you click this, this will pop back up if you end up accidentally closing this. You can auto hide this or pin all of this information as well. The other one that we'll primarily be working with today is also called geoprocessing. Geoprocessing, or the geoprocessing pane here, is all of your analytical and analysis tools and representation tools that you can use to get to different assumptions about the data. You can project to different data types, you can export, you can run analyses. This is kind of the one-stop shop for a lot of different tools here. Okay, so we've kind of talked a little bit about the user interface for the graphic user interface. Let's go ahead and let's talk about data mining. Okay, so when collecting or gathering data, it's going to be really important that you think about where that data is coming from, but if it's peer-reviewed and if it's creditable. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's flip to a few data repositories of where we can look for existing data. One that I typically, and I'll share these links within the chat. One that I typically look at is one created for Idaho that is used for University of Idaho in general, but also through extension. That's Inside Idaho. Okay. Underneath this, you have GIS software and support. You have U of I licensed aerial imagery, the U of I gallery, which is a lot of data that you can use and download from, both vector and raster data types, aerial imagery. And those of you who are interested in LiDAR data, there's Idaho LiDAR Consortium, where you can bring in different point clouds, highest hit, and bare earth data types from here and download it. It takes a little bit of processing, but you can download a lot of the data from here as well. There's also Idaho Geospatial Office, and then also Idaho Framework data, where you can bring in different maps from and data sets from here as well. Primarily for today, let's look at the U of I gallery here. Okay, and what's interesting is that about this is it's been updated, I believe, in the past 2 or 3 years. That all of this platform is through ArcGIS Online, and as a UI student, you're automatically signed up for ArcGIS Online, to where you can access a lot of this data, or all of this data. So if we're looking on here and we bring in different data types, let's look at let's bring in Moscow. So if I do a quick search for Moscow, I can see I have aerial imagery that I can access here. I've also have some post-fire inventory and analysis. I can bring in a lot of these data types just by clicking on them, but also downloading them. So let's see, let's see. Okay, so we got some polygonal data, or polygon data. So if you're looking at burn intensity, you can select this this data type, open it, and you can see at the bottom, now this is becoming a zipped file, and I can extract that to a particular location. And in that location, I can link my Arc Online or Arc Pro map to this. Okay. So say, for example, I spend countless amount of hours downloading all the data that I think is applicable for my project and what type of analyses I want to run. I would export that, right? I would, do a show in location here, and I would export that or extract that to and make sure you're extracting it or unzipping it to a location that I want to be called my project file, right? I want to be, data or habitat suitability or whatever analyses that I'm running here. Okay, so say we spend countless amount of hours doing that for the city of Moscow. You can also look at some other locations, like, for example, if we look at the Geospatial Data Gateway produced by USDA and also NRCS. You can get data, right, just by clicking this this button. This is a lot of raster and vector data types for land use and land cover, precip, soils data or Surgo data, a number of different data forms that you can download and have access to. The other place that you can look is, in particular, the project that you're working on. Most cities and municipalities have their own data types, right, that you can use and download from. So, for example, if I go into the city of Moscow's data type, their ARC Online page or their enterprise website, I can select park locator, and I can open this particular data set, right, that I found in ArcGIS Pro, all through the Arc Online platform. Okay, I'm not signed in this here, but this is public data, so you can access this. So say, for example, if I open this in ArcGIS Pro, I can see that it's downloaded here. And I can open another ArcGIS Pro map to start to bring in some of these data types, or this particular data set. Okay, so this is now, or is currently, loading into this ArcGIS Pro project. And you can see here are all of the parks in Moscow, Idaho. Okay, and now I can go in and I can select these particular parks, right? So I can say, okay, I want to make this the only selectable layer here. And I can have this as a way to just see information about the parks, about this particular park. Let's check this one out. So if I select this, I can see that I have some associated attributes. I can see that this is called Almond Asbury Llewellyn Park. And I can see that here's the address, and I can see here are some of the amenities. These are associated attributes with this particular file, right? So this is kind of the beauty of ArcGIS or GIS, is it's smart, right? It has some information with each one of these data types, points, lines, and also raster data here. Here we just have points and lines for this particular data set. Also in this one, there's bike routes, transit stops, smart transit stops, things like this. Okay, let's go ahead and let's bring this into our other project, because I have two projects open now. So something interesting about Arc Pro is you can take two different projects if you have a pretty strong processor, and I can drag this into another project, right? So I can bring this into this this project that's open. So I can drag this over to my contents pane, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and close this one out. And right whenever I drag this in, now I want to change the stacking order. I can't see my my short list here of all of the parks because world imagery is above that. Okay, let's go ahead and let's change the stacking order. Now I can see those parks being displayed here. Awesome. Let's see. I don't really like the base map either. Let's go ahead and let's change that. Instead of having this aerial, right? Let's change that to something that's a little bit simpler. So up here at the top, I'm gonna turn on my magnifier so everybody can see. Up here at the top, I'm going to go ahead and go to base map, and I'm going to change this over to kind of this just, you know, basic version here, this dark, well, let's use this light gray canvas here. Let's not make it look too Assassin's Creed kind of video game style. Okay, so we have this popping up, okay, and we have this loaded up inside of this this particular project, and I have some attributes associated with this. Okay, okay, so if I right click on this layer, right, in my contents pane, and I go to attribute table, I can see that I have at the bottom all of this information about each attribute. It tells me the name of each park, right? And then also there might be an associated website with some of them, and there might be a location set or you know, a particular area where that's located to. And it also tells me that it's what data type it is. It's a shapefile. Whoever created the data controls what this looks like, or the size of it, or things like that. So it's going to be, or the color conventions. So it's going to be really important that you know where the data is coming from and that it's from a reputable source. Okay, so the other thing about basic navigation that I want to get to is by using, if you have a rolly wheel, that's the technical term for this for a mouse, it makes it a lot easier to zoom in. And then also, if you hold that down to pan, right, where you can grab that and start to move around this platform, it just makes life easier. I would strongly recommend to not use the mouse pad on a laptop to do this. One, carpal tunnel. Two, there's some functionality that's just really hard to get to whenever we're navigating around. So I would strongly recommend a mouse with a rolling wheel. Okay, so the other thing that I want to do is let's assume, like we did earlier, let's assume that we downloaded a lot of data to our to one folder or file on our desktop, okay, or on a cloud, okay. And now let's go ahead and let's load in a lot of that data. Okay, so we want to link to that folder. The way that you link to it is you go to folders up here at the top, right click and go to add folder connection, okay. And now I can go in and find that folder. I'm just going to go to my S drive, my shared drive, which is all the courses with UI. And I've saved that to a remote location. And I'll have this on my folder that I use for my my ArcGIS class. That's going to be ArcGIS, right? And you can see that the naming conventions really matter and are really useful. All lowercase, no spaces, and less than 13 characters. In particular, that's you have to do that for raster analysis. Okay, so that naming convention is really important. So I'll go ahead and hit OK, and then I'll see that once I have that loaded in, there is my ArcGIS folder up here. Okay. Now another way to do that, another way that's pretty quick, is if you go to your file up here, and I go to my File Explorer. Excuse me. If I go to my File Explorer up here and I go to that same location in the S drive, and let's go to a different folder type. There's another one that's just called ArcGIS Data here. I'll grab that and I can drag that over into my catalog pane here, right? And automatically that drags in and it's just quickly linked to it. Now keep in mind that when you're looking at this in File Explorer versus in Arc Catalog here, the biggest difference is if I look at that in Arc Catalog, I go to courses, excuse me, in File Explorer, I can see all of my data types have different information associated with it. So I don't want to move file types around here, right? If I click on vector data, each vector file has about 5 or 6 associated file types with that. Okay, so I don't want to move things around here. If I do, I want to do it from the file level. Now, if you're moving things around, if I'm looking at data in my Arc Catalog platform here, and I go to that same thing, that same file for Moscow, and I go to vector, and I'm looking at some of this data here. If I'm looking at each one of those files, there's just one file type here. There's just one particular file type. Okay. So we have all of our data loaded up here. We have all of our files that we want to use loaded up here. Now let's start to, and we actually had some public data that we loaded into this project. Now let's start to run some of these analyses, or just basic analyses. Okay, so let's bring in different files. Let's bring in different files and let's see what we have to work with. So the first one that I have here is the city limit shapefile, okay? And that was from inside Idaho. I'm gonna drop that in. And then I can see that here are Moscow's city limits, right? So I can start to understand, okay, here's my boundary. And say, for example, typically I use this dark red outline for city limits and boundaries. But if I don't like that, I can change this symbology by going to this in my contents pane and double clicking on it. Okay, and you have all of these different pre-canned representation types types for each one of these layers. So I can use green. I can also use, whatever color that's already pre-canned with an associated naming convention. If I don't like this and I want to change this to something a little bit darker than that red, I can go to properties and I can specify, okay, instead of this dark red, let's make this cherry wood brown color. That's in ArcGIS Pro's pre-canned color conventions. You can also use hex codes and RGB values through the eyedropper if you'd like as well. So I'll just select this cherry wood brown and I'll go ahead and hit apply. And slight difference, but that's going to apply this to this symbology. So now all of that has been changed. Let's just make something. I'm going to use this pink and then switch back just to show you kind of like how quickly you can change some of these symbologies to make them more appealing for representing the information you want to represent. You can add in symbols, right? Each one of these can be a symbol. Like you could put, you can use your own symbols. Some students in some of my courses may or may not have used the symbol of my face for each one of these polygons or symbols or dots point data before. Pretty hilarious, actually. But you can use whatever you'd like to be able to input some of these symbols and information here. Okay, so that is all too quick. Navigation and how to load in some of these data types. Let's see, so we talked about basic layout, drawing, order, map tabs. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is you also have, if you wanted to insert different maps, say for example, if you wanted 3 or 4 other maps, you can also go up here at the top to insert and then start to drag in new map or create new maps. So you can have, a lot of different tabs up here with different types of maps and representations here. An important thing to know is that if you're changing the symbology here, right, it's not changing the symbology inside of the data itself, right? However, if you delete an attribute table, if you delete, say, for example, in your attribute table, one of these rows, it will change the data here. Okay, so that's something you have to be really careful about, is if you're working, say, for example, in a firm where you're sharing data, you want to make for darn sure that you aren't editing or deleting other people's work. Okay, so usually what I do is I copy that over and put my initials behind it, just to make this a little bit easier to process. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And then now what I want to do is on the vector side of things, I want to start to bring in vector data and then run some all too quick analyses here. Let's see. So let's go ahead and let's bring in our some land cover data for the city of Moscow. Okay, so this is land use and land cover as a shape file here. So inside of this data set, if I bring, and this was from Web Spatial Gateway, and I believe it's also on Inside Idaho, so you can download it there. And I'm going to bring this into my file. And notice I just dragged it into my my map projection here. So these are showing up. You can see that ArcGIS will pick what that is looking like for you in the representation here in terms of file type. You can change these to be typical land use, land cover color conventions. If you'd like to use those, you can kind of pick and choose how you want that representation to look like. Notice you have about, if I bring this up, in my contents page, I have pane, I have about 30 different land use and land cover classes that are represented inside of this data map. Okay, those are all for the city of Moscow, but also a bit of context outside of it as well. So if I want to change the symbology for that, if I want to make these more compelling for whatever reason, I can right click on this. I can go to symbology, right click on the data level. And if I want to change this to unique values, which those are discrete or unique values, I can select on the color scheme. And I can also go to different different data types here. I'm going to use these purple and blues here just to make this a little bit more Yeah, okay. So you can see discretely, there's a difference between all of these other classes. It looks more like a color ramp, but that's okay for now. We're just, we're gonna, for processing, we're just gonna leave it as is for now. Okay, so we have all this popping up. This has all been, say for example, we spent countless hours getting this to the representation we want with typical land use and land color conventions. Some important things to look at before you start to run any analyses is you want to look at what that data is, where it's coming from, and the associated attributes. So one thing that I typically do is I'll first open the attribute table, and I'll see what I have here. Okay, so I have land cover types, I have area in square feet, I have area in acres. Okay, and then I also have some names, right? Some naming conventions of land cover where it gets really specific, but also a land use and land cover. In this case, it's divided up into 4 different types: agricultural, developed, natural, and open water. Okay, so I have all of these in 2 different forms, so I can change that based off of the attribute table to be symbolized the way that I'd like it to be. Let's see, before we do any of that, let's also look at some other information that's going to be important for processing. So if I right click again on this data layer here in my contents pane, and I go to properties, I can see that I have some, the name here that's displaying inside of this project, and I can change the name if I want. And it's not going to affect the data in my folder. So I can call that land cover Moscow. I can have spaces and capitals and all of that stuff because I'm not, I'm just changing the representation here. I'm not changing the actual data. So think of it as the left side representation, the right side, the actual or data here. And I can also, so I have the name changed there. I can look at metadata. Maybe there's some information that's being displayed here about tags, or kind of like hashtags, how you can find this if you upload this to the cloud. Descriptions, summaries, sources, all that information. I also have data source, which tells me where that file lives, the geometry behind it, polygon, and then also the vertical units. So vertical units and are here if it has associated Z values. So for example, building heights or things like that, are tree canopies, it will give you that information as well. Extent, right? That's the spatial window, and that will be in whatever coordinate system that you, degree decimal system that you want to denote here. So if I want that to be in meters, I can also be in meters. If I want that to be in degree decimals, or whatever is useful for you, you can have it displayed there. I can also see my spatial reference. Spatial reference, those of you who had a kind of a basics GIS course or a geography course, coordinate systems and projections are very important to be consistent throughout your projects. Okay, so I can see that this one right here is NAD 1983, UTM, Universal Transverse Mercator, Zone 11N. Okay, that's for this project or for this workshop. That's just important to know that we need to be consistent there. Okay, so that's just going to be, you could have an entire course about projections, but in this case, we're just using NAD 83 UTM Zone 11N. Some other information here is you have the degrees, and then also the bands, or how many bands if it's raster information, and also the grid cells or grid cell size if it's raster information. I'm going to go back to general, and I'm going to hit OK, and that's going to change this this data representation for the name to be present there. So if I go ahead and hit OK, I can see that land cover on space Moscow is showing up here. Keep in mind that is not changing the actual data. So if I look at the representation, land cover space Moscow, right, inside of my contents pane, that's not affecting the data. It's just changing the alias or the representation. In the right, you can notice that the data has not been changed. Okay, so that's popping up there. I can also change some other things in terms of how the appearance looks. So if I go to appearance, now it's at 45% transparency. I can change that to be 0, right, or 20, whatever you think is useful to showcase that information. This really helps for ground truthing. Say, for example, if we had our aerial behind this, we can start to see if that type matches up with what it actually is on the ground with an aerial. Okay, so first things first, let's go ahead and I'm going to, for the demonstration here today, I'm going to keep that transparency at 0. And I'm going to run just a quick search by attributes to select different types here. So if I have my attribute table open up here, down here at the bottom, let's just move some of this stuff over. Okay, and I can see that I want to search for different attribute types. And then maybe I want to select by size, right? So if I right click up here at the top on area acres and I go to sort descending, and that'll take a little bit of time to load. I can see that all of these polygons have area acres associated with them. But let's say that we want to select all of the types that are, you know, are some of the biggest types here. So everything that is kind of around the 623 range to the 200 range. So you can select one, right? And then go all the way to, let's do 198. We'll have that as our cutoff, and I'll do a shift, and I'll select here. And then if I go to my representation, I can see that I've selected all of those larger polygons within this site here. I can see that those have all been selected. Just as a quick reference here, I'm going to bring up the city limits, and I can see that you have all of these data types as being selected here in my attribute table. Now, with all of these selected, you can do a number of different things. You can create your own data, right? So if I want to take this selection and export it, I can right click on that layer and then go to export features. And I can export that feature as its own shape file into another project, for example, and then just have that layer and then start to play around with that or analyze that if I'd like. Before we do that, let's talk about how to add to this selection. So for example, if I'm in map here and I have select, and this is, you can also select attributes by hand, right? Or by using your mouse. So I can do that from the attribute table, right? Or if I want to, let's say, let's clear all of this stuff, you can go to clear here. Okay, that's one way to clear your selection. And I can select by hand, so I can say, okay, let's roughly get everything in this area in North Moscow. So I'm just going to create that. Cool. And draw a box around it. Everything that I touched, right? Everything that I put my cursor around, I can see that that has been selected and it's reflected inside of the attribute table, right? I can do this also to where I only want my selections to be displayed. So I can say show selected area records. So just the areas that I selected are showing up here, okay? And then just by, out of curiosity, I wanna see how many acres I selected here, right? So what you can do is you can right click on area acres and you can go to statistics. And then inside of this chart properties pane, you can see that I've selected altogether 3,329.9 blah 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 acres here, right? Out of 65,124, right? So if you look on the left, the data set as the sum, that's the total acres of the entire site. Whereas on the right, that's the entire selection. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to clear this selection. I'm going to go, and you can see there's another table that'll pop up here as a chart. You can also export these charts and put them into a presentation if useful. Let's go back to this this attribute table, and I want to clear the selection, but I don't want to go up to the top every time I clear a selection. So I'll just go here and I'll double click on this the square up in the top left here, and that's a quick way to clear your selection. So for example, you can see you also have this selected. You also have the city limits selected in this one. So you'll go back to the city limits data or just clear the entire selection there. Okay, so that's one way to do a hand selection. You can also do that with lasso tool in a lot of different ways as well. The other way to make a selection is through select by attributes. Okay, so that means you're selecting by all of those different attributes that are in the associated attribute table. Okay, so let's say we want to select all of the open space, right? Let's say all of the developed, high intensity developed, low intensity, and medium intensity development in the city of Moscow. So you'll do that with an expression type. Okay, so let me just close that out and redo that real quick. So let's select by attributes. Let's select everything that is developed here. And you'll use Boolean logic to do that. Okay, so up here, I'll go to my input rows. I want this to be consistent with my data table. So I want that to be land cover, Moscow. So I'll go to my data type land cover, Moscow. And then underneath this, what I want to do is I don't want to add to the current selection if I already have something selected. I want to create a new selection here. So I'll go to new selection. Okay. Let's leave that up for a second. Okay, sorry if this is making anybody nauseous. And I want to add in a new expression type. So I'll click on new expression. And then now I can start to put in some modifiers or some parameters of what I'm searching for and select by attributes. So here I'll go to my land cover and I'll say is equal to developed. And I'll use that first high intensity developed here. Okay, I'm going to add a clause. And with the kind of the notions of Boolean logic, I want this to be or. Think of or as more, right? Where you're selecting more features, and is going to be where both of those attributes apply. You don't want and for here. You just want or. Land cover is equal to, let's do medium or low intensity is the next one. Let's add in a clause. Let's do or land cover is equal to, the next one was medium intensity. And then I'll do or land cover is equal to open space. Awesome. And I'll go ahead and apply it. And that's going to take a little bit of time to run. Okay, let's get out of the magnifier. And I can see that that has searched for all of those development types, right, in my extent here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then now let's take this data. We want to create this as its own data layer. Okay, so I'll right click and I'll go to sharing and I'll go, data, and I'll go to export features. And now I want this to be exported into this location in this geo database. And I'm going to call that developed _ Moscow. And I'll go ahead and hit OK. That's going to export this feature type as a shape file into my new data set that I've created. Okay. And see, it'll take a bit of time to update. And you can see that that has created its own layer, okay, as per the selection. Okay. So that's one way that you can start to export and use some of this data inside of your projects here. Right, so you can see, okay, all of these have been exported, and now I have all of this as exported data that I can start to play around with and also add in attributes. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, and let's go back to this particular representation here. Okay, so that's select by attributes. So let's go ahead and let's clear the selection. And then let's add in some other data to where we're combining search inquiries. Okay, so say for example, if I wanted to do, let's find all of these land use and land cover classes that are within the floodplain. Okay, so I have the shape file inside of my data set here, which is called FEMA, or FEMA floodplain. I'm gonna drag that into my project, which it's popping up as green, right? And now what I want to do is I want to see and search and create my own data set to find all of those features that are within the floodplain, right? So say, for example, I want to see which land cover classes, or if there's more high intensity development inside of the floodplain, right? Or also if I wanted to plan for green infrastructure, right? To say, okay, what are the best locations for a retention pond for flooding inside of the floodplain, an open space in Moscow? You can search for that there. So you'll go to search by location. The first thing that you'll have as the input features is you'll have my land cover data here. So that's going to be my older file land cover. And I want this to be, I want to change the relationship to within, okay? And my select features, that's going to be inside of the FEMA floodplain, okay? I'm not going to do search distance or any of that thing, but you can, if you'd like, to make that a search distance within a certain amount of meters or acres. Go ahead and hit apply. And I'm going to zoom out here. And I can see here that I have all of those features, right, that are within the floodplain. Okay. So, and notice the relationship changes. You can note and denote how that relationship is going to be affected. So for example, if I click intersect and I hit apply there, notice that's every place that land cover polygons have intersected with the floodplain. That's way too much, right? I just want everything that's within, so I can just do within for that particular search. Okay, and then now, after that, you can export these features and then start to associate some of that, or populate what that's going to look like. So that's another way that you can start to, you know, create your own data, right? You can take this selection that's been made, right? And it has to be from the source data, but you can export this feature to say, let's export it. Let's call these developed underscore in floodplain. And this is just kind of my GIS speak that I use my shorthand to condense file types. So let's see. So I'll go ahead and export that. Okay, and then that's popping up. I'm going to turn off all this other stuff, so I just have all of those polygons that are within the floodplain here. Awesome. That's exactly what I wanted. Okay, and you can calculate those. You can calculate the amount of acreage in those features there in the attribute table. So let's see what that looks like. Let's see. So I'll go to attribute table. Okay, and I have all of this showing up. And I can go to area acres inside of this, and I can run the calculation through statistics like we did earlier to see what that looks like for my for all of this new data that I've produced. Let's do that with some existing data. Okay, I'm going to go to floodplain here. Let me turn off all of this stuff. I have my floodplain in Moscow, and say, for example, if we want to calculate all of the area acres in this floodplain in the city limits of Moscow, one way that you can do that is by, let's close this out. One way you can do that is by opening the attribute table in this FEMA floodplain map. Okay, and let's open that. And I can see that I have, okay, I'm missing the acres here. So I have the name of the zone, right? And then I have the shape length. I know it's a polygon, awesome. But I want to create a column which is just for the area acres. So the way that you do that is you go to add here. Okay, underneath this, inside of this field, let me move this thing around. I'm going to call this inside of field, instead of just calling it field, I'll change that to area underscore acres. Okay, and then also I'll change this, I'll keep this as a long. And then I'll have this as a numeric field because I want this to be a number at the end of it. So instead of none, I'll select numeric. I'll leave these decimal places as is, and I'll hit OK. Okay, perfect. So that's popping up. Back out of this real quick. So that's popping up as numeric, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. So once you have that good and ready to go, you'll go to this save. You won't save your project, but you'll save this. So it will save the creation of this new column to your attribute table. Okay, awesome. So that's been saved. That's now numeric. This has been updated in your attribute table. I'm gonna go ahead and close out this one to see if I created a new column there in my attribute table. Awesome. So it's been created, but it's not populated, right? I want to find out how many acres are in this floodplain. So the way that you do that is at the top here, right? You'll right click, let me get out of the magnifier. You'll right click, okay? And you'll go to what's called calculate geometry. I'll select calculate geometry. In the input features, I'll say that that's perfect. That's for FEMA. That's for this floodplain. And then I'll say that the type, I want that to be area acres. I want that to be area. And then this will pop up with area unit. I want to say what those units are to be. I can have that as square miles, meters, feet, yards, nautical miles, or acres. And I want to match my coordinate system. Remember, we talked about coordinate systems all too quickly, but we want to match our coordinate systems because we want the new data to be consistent all throughout the project. So I'm going to use my land cover data here. Awesome. And that's popping up with NAD 83 UTM zone 11N for this part of Idaho. And I'll K there. So now it's calculating that. Get out of magnifier while it's doing its thing. And I can see that there's 357 acres inside of this polygon, right? So now I can do that for new data that I've produced, all of that fun stuff to be able to start to associate attributes with this particular feature type. So that's one quick tool in terms of bringing in data. And I know we're covering a lot of ground here, but navigation, basic navigation, selection, select by attributes, a little bit of data mining. Now let's move on to another set of tools to run geospatial processing. I'm going to go ahead and clear my selection. And I'm going to turn off some of these layers that I've produced. I have the city of Moscow popping up here. Let's go ahead and change this base map so it's a little bit more pleasant to look at here. Awesome. Okay, so I got this popping up. I'm going to close that attribute table. I don't really need it for now. And I have this displaying in terms of all of the parks in Moscow, Idaho, within the city limits. Okay. So what if my question here, my research question is, what are the walkability, or what is a walkability distance? What are the walkable neighborhoods? Excuse me, that was what I was looking for. What are the walkable neighborhoods in proximity to the parks of Moscow, right? So if I'm looking for walkable neighborhoods and to see what that looks like, I have two tools that I can run to be able to do that. So the first tool, I'm in my contents pane here, right? And I have a lot of this data represented here. I'm going to go to my geoprocessing tool. Okay? So I'll go to this geoprocessing tab here. If your geoprocessing tab isn't displaying here at the bottom, you go to analysis and then select tools or this toolbox, and that's going to show the geoprocessing pane. I'll select geoprocessing here. And then now I have all of these toolboxes that I can use to start to run, in this case for my question, a buffer around these particular areas or these parks. So I have my favorites that I've used before. I also have toolboxes. This is kind of the old school way to find those tools. And then I also have the portal where these ready to use live Esri based tools that you can use. I'm gonna use favorites. And I'm just going to type in up here at the top, the buffer tool. Okay. And then underneath this, I'll go to buffer, select buffer there. And then, let me get out of that real quick. So you'll notice in the pane, every time you select a new tool, this is going to pop up. You have this all too quick kind of platform that's going to open up, and it sets the parameters for each of how you want that tool to run. So you're telling, this simple program how you want that tool to run its thing or to run its course. So what I want to do is I want to say I want this inside of a 10-minute neighborhood for Moscow, Idaho, inside of all the parks. Okay, so I'll have this my input features here. That's going to be my parks, which is the short list. Do not remove. That was those those points that are popping up here. My output feature, I'm going to call this. Let's see, Moscow walkable parks to neighborhood. And I'll just call this ND for now. And this one can be vector data can be over 13 characters. So you want to make sure you don't have spaces. Okay, so I'll have these linear units set up. I'm going to make this 1/4 of a mile, and research says that 1/4 of a mile is about the 10-minute neighborhood. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and type in 0.25. The unknown here, this box that's showing up, that's going to be miles. Okay, planar is set up here, and then I'll change this to a dissolve all features into one single feature, and I'll go ahead and run it. Let's see, so while that's running, you can see all too quickly that created a Euclidean distance outside of each park feature. So that's good and all, but what about those of you who are familiar with Moscow? What about hills, right? What about drive time? What about street network, right? It doesn't really get to it. This is great. This is a great tool for associating a buffer, right, for Euclidean distance. But if we want to figure out, okay, what is this with traffic time? There's another tool that you can use inside of the ArcGIS Pro platform. Okay, let's go back. Let's save this layer, but let's just turn it off for now. And I'll go back up here at the top. Okay, so I'll get out of this buffer tool. And underneath this, I'm going to call this, run a new search. I'm going to call this generate drive time trade areas. Okay, generate drive time trade areas. I'll select that. Now this is under our business analyst tool. Okay, so this is popping up. And I want to do the same thing. You can also, over here, just this FYI, you can create your own features and draw in, say, for whatever you value as being important, you can put that in there. Let's run an input feature, and I'll have this as that same, all of the parks, the point data for all the parks here. Okay, so that's popping up there. I'm going to change this output feature class. I'm going to call this, let's see, Moscow parks 10 minutes. Okay, Moscow parks 10 minutes. Instead of distance type as driving time, let's make this walkable time. So let's change that to walking time, right? And then here I'll have this as values. Awesome. Distances, I'm going to put that at 10 for 10 minutes. And then distance units, that's also set to minutes. Okay. For all of these other fields, we'll leave them as is. We want this to be overlap. See, yeah, let's not do split. Let's have those as overlap. Okay, and then I'm going to go down here at the bottom and then hit run. Okay, and you can see while it's running, you can open details, and it will give you what it created, where that's located, what the parameters were, and then also even the projection, I believe. You can also open history, right, here to see, here's all the tools that I've run in this particular project. Okay, so let's see what we've created here. So you have all of these different buffers, right, for 10-minute neighborhoods inside of all of the Moscow parks, right, or 10-minute walking distance from all of these parks. And this is based off of traffic or annual average daily trips, right? It's also based off of street network, right? And it produces these polygons by enriching data, okay? So if I right click on this and I go to my attribute table, now I can see that I've looked at and created all of these ring buffers around these areas for each one of those parks, right? And I can, if I wanted to figure out one particular park, let's look at the dog park. Okay, and I select the dog park here. Here is the walkable neighborhood for that particular park. That's a 10-minute walk from this particular park. So you can export that again with that selection, or you can run some further analyses for that one. Okay, so let's see. We have that all set up. Maybe we want to add in some other information here. Maybe we want to see what that looks like with all of these 10-minute walks and inside of the floodplain. So I want to, look and see what that looks like here. So I'm going to bring that up to the top, right? And say, for example, let's clear my selection also. Say, for example, that's showcasing or showing this information the way that I want it to be, the way that I want it outputted, right? Or the way that I want it created. And I'm happy with it, right? So now what you want to do, right, is you want to make sure you're saving your project, right? So underneath the project tab here is you can go to save as or just a quick save. I recommend people save often. Even set a timer and when you're working on your projects or after every analyses or geoprocessing tool that you run, you really want to hit save because, sometimes with larger data sets, things happen, right? And you want to make sure that you're saving often and don't rely on backups. Or excuse me, don't rely on the system to back up itself. Arc Pro is getting better at that, but it's you can lose a lot of information in processing by not hitting save. I'm usually really superstitious, so I make sure that I save often. Okay, so we have this set up. We're satisfied with it. The other thing that you can do is you can clip all of these to the floodplain. So, for example, you can clip out all of these parks, right, inside of the floodplain and all of these walkable neighborhoods inside of that as well. Let's see. Let's hold off on doing that for now. But I want to show you all some another tool or another set of tools using raster data. Okay, so let's turn off all of this stuff. So I've got that set up. I'm going to turn off this. I'm going to leave on this this particular Moscow extent, and I'm going to go back to catalog here. And then underneath this Moscow folder, I'm going to drag in some raster data. Okay, and I'm going to almost do the same type of analyses using what land cover types are in the floodplain. But let's say I want to find the best location for some floodplain control features or interventions inside of the floodplain and also open space. But I want to do that similarly to what we talked about at the beginning of the workshop here today by using map algebra, right? Where we're just adding or multiplying binary maps together. You can do that with raster analysis. Okay, so let's bring in some raster data. You can see the icon off here to the side. Raster data in your catalog, it's going to pop up like a grid, right? It'll pop up here as the symbol as a grid. Also something that I forgot to mention is you can add in data types here by right-clicking and then going to add to current map. Okay, so you can do that as well. You don't have to just drag in data if you don't prefer to do that. Okay, so I have 2 bits of data added in here. I have my binary map, right, of 1s and 0s for the floodplain in Moscow. Everything that is outside of the floodplain is this teal. Everything that's pink is 1. ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS, they automatically assign these for every time you load in new data. So, change your color selection based off of what you think is the most compelling. I usually tell people that's a good way or good rule of thumb to remember. Okay, so we have that showing up. Let's go ahead and let's bring in our land cover type. I'm going to change the stacking order here. And I can see that for this extent, I have all of these data forms in a color ramp. I don't want that to be the case. I want these to be discrete. So I'm going to change my symbology. I'll right click here and I'll go to symbology up here whenever I click on that. Instead of a stretch or a grade, I'm going to change that to discrete or unique values. I'll go to unique here. And then that's going to give me a generated color scheme. I can bring in my own color schema. I can modify this to however I prefer. You know, it's essentially however you'd like to show that. I'm just going to put this as this one. And then for demo purposes, it's not too pretty to look at, but at least it's not as distracting as the last one. So I'm going to leave it as it is for now. Okay, now we have two different data classes up here. I'll bring these all the way up to the top so we're not getting confused by anything else. So I've got this one, I've got land cover underneath city limit, and then the last one is my floodplain as raster data here. Okay, cool. Now something that I want to do, right, and that I want to showcase here is how to change or how to add these data types together in binaries. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to produce a binary map for that's consistent with my floodplain data, right? But I just want this to be open space inside of the Moscow city limits, or inside of this rectangle here. So before I run any raster analysis, I have to perform something called setting the environments, right? So what I want to do is I want to see the source of what this file type looks like. So I can see the resolution isn't too bad. You know, this works better for planning, right? Whenever you zoom out with this resolution. So I want to check to make sure that I'm using consistent analysis all the way through. So I right click on my FEMA, I go to properties, and then I can see that underneath the source, I have this in vertical units as US feet. And then I have the raster information. That is 30 meter by 30 meter grid cell size. Okay, so 30 meter by 30 meter. That's the resolution per each pixel, right? So it takes less processing the more aggregated your data is, but the more fine the grain is, right? So if this is 1 meter by 1 meter, the longer the time the processing and the higher the output size of that map will be. So keep that in mind when you're performing raster analyses. Okay, so we want this to be 30 meter by 30 meter. So all the new data that we produce, let's reference FEMA_G, or the floodplain here. So that's going to be our reference data set here. So I'll go to analysis. I'll go to environments up here at the top. Okay, and I want to tell ArcGIS Pro all of the new raster data that I produce is going to be at a grid. I'm going to change this current workspace. I'm just going to set this to my desktop under this, right? Because naming conventions matter. I'll have this set up, just set all the way to that. I'll hit OK. Okay. Scratch workspace is important for certain tools. For the tools that we'll show today, it's not too necessary. So I'm just going to go ahead and change that path also. So it's spring 21. And I'm going to match my output coordinate system. So I'm going to go ahead and change this over to that FEMA grid, okay? Because I want to reference that thing because I'm running my process for that. Notice that it's a different projected coordinate system. It's a state plane. And I want to change the extent. I want my window to be the same as this, right? My window for processing. So I'll change FEMA. Okay. And then I want to change my cell size to also match the 30 meter by 30 meter grid. So I'll go ahead and hit FEMA there, okay? And then I want to zoom down, or excuse me, scroll down a little bit here. And I also want to change so I have the extent set, right? The cell size set, right? And then the other thing is I want to snap the centroid, or the center of each new raster, to the old raster, or to land use, excuse me, the FEMA grid. So I'll go to snap raster, set FEMA, and then I'll hit OK. So now I have set my environments. I'm ready to start to run some of this processing, okay? So the first thing, I'm good on this one. I feel confident about this binary map. It's just a 1 or a 0, so awesome. The other thing, what I really want to do is I want to process this. I want to change this map, right? Or not change this map, but create a new map that is all of the open space, developed open space, right? that is the developed open space as a 1 and everything else as a 0. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do, because we want to look for, our question here is, what are the open spaces inside of the floodplain? And that's going to help us to find green infrastructure for floodplain controls, right? Or a retention pond, for example. So let's see, I'll right click on this and I'll go to my attribute table. And I want to check out this really quickly. So I have, what are the open space values, right? So that's going to be important. My value for developed open space is 20, right? And if I select this here, I can see that in that cyan color, here's all of the open space inside of my, my map representation up here at the top. So I can see that all those are going to be selected. Let's clear that selection, and I'm going to go ahead and close the attribute table. And then what I want to do now is I want to create a binary map, right? So I can add those maps together, both binary maps. So I'll go to geoprocessing. Underneath geoprocessing, I'll go to a new tool that I'll call raster calculator here. And then I'll go to the spatial analysis tools. And what I want to do is I want to select everything by double clicking, everything that is equal to that value of 20 for developed open space. So I'll do it equals, and make sure you're selecting it here because the spaces matter inside of this SQL language. And then I'll type in 20, right? Because 20 is my developed open space. Underneath this folder, I'll call this dev open, and then I'll put that as RC for raster calculator. Now, this is going to be important whenever you start to create this data, right? Because you're creating new data now. You want this to be less than 13 characters, no spaces, and definitely no capitals here. You can have numbers towards the end, but not to start out with. I know that sounds really constraining, but to run at raster analysis, that's kind of what you have to have set up. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's run it. And that's going to give you all of the features. I'm going to turn this off while it's doing this thing. Oops. All of the features in a binary map, right, that has been produced now, where it's everything that is pink is outside of open space, everything else, and 1 is all of the developed open space inside of Moscow, or inside of my extent here. Okay, so now what I want to do is, let's drag this up. What I want to do is I want to, sort of like what we talked about at the beginning, I want to run that that map algebra to look for a range of the most suitable locations for a flood control intervention here inside of the floodplain, right? So I want to add both of these together to look for the best, the medium, and the worst places to put this particular intervention, okay? So I'll go back up here at the top, and I'll go to raster calculator again. I'll go to spatial analyst. And I'm going to take my new developed open space, and I'll add with an operator, right? Okay, and then I'll double click FEMA, okay? And then now I'm going to run this. So I'll go ahead and hit run. And those two have been added together, okay? So if I change the symbology, so now if I'm looking at the spatial extent, if I look at this, I can see everything that is green is the highly suitable locations in the floodplain. Everything that's 1 is okay, right? And then everything that is 0 is not acceptable. So everything that's a 2 is the best, right? So what you can do is you can create a color ramp through symbology to say, okay, red is being the best, green is being the best, red is being the worst, right? So you can do that through a stretch. Okay. And selecting this, okay. And also you can also do it that way, right? That's one way to do it. Or let's change this real quick. Or you can also do that with unique values, right? Just by changing the symbology, since we only have 3 classes. So you can say, okay, if I click on this, red is the worst. Up here, this yellow is second best, right? And then green is being the best here. Perfect. So this is probably a little bit, invasive on the eyes. So one thing that you can do is you can, again, change that opacity here for this layer, right? So I can put this at, usually I go around 40%, and that makes it a little bit more appealing with an aerial behind it. So say, for example, if I go back to map and then change my base map to an aerial. Cool. And I turn off all these other ones. So at least I can see a little bit behind it if I zoom in. Here are those suitable areas for where I've run that analysis, right? So this is really a useful way to create this for a city, right? To give them a little bit of feedback of where the most suitable locations for a municipality for stormwater interventions. Okay, but I don't want all this other excess stuff outside of the city limits. So another tool that you'll run is what's called a raster clip. So I'll go to geoprocessing, I'll go back one, and I'll put in, I believe it's called clip raster. Okay, and I'll select that. Underneath my input raster, that's going to be the cookie dough, right? So that's going to be developed open space RCR, right? And then the cookie cutter is going to be my extent, which is the city limit, right? And that can be vector data. I'll use input clipping features. I'll use the maximum here, and I'm going to call this thing, right, GI underscore Moscow. And I'm going to go ahead and set the node data value to something that you'll remember. So in case there's no data, because you don't want no data inside of your project, and I'll hit run. Okay. So if you see a 99 in your attribute table, that means something went wrong. Okay, so let's turn off all of this other stuff. Now you can see that has been clipped to this particular extent, right, of Moscow, and I have that run, and I can change this symbology to be useful for however I want that to display. Perfect. Okay, so that is vector and raster analysis in a nutshell. Okay. The other thing that you can do is, now that you have this set, you can take all of these data layers and upload them to ArcGIS Online. So one way to do that is you can right click on your data layer and then go to sharing, and you can share as a web layer, right? So underneath this, if you go to sharing, share as a web layer, it'll take a second to upload real quick, or to do its thing. Okay, so now you can write layers to, or excuse me, write information and share this data on ArcGIS Online and make it public, or however you'd prefer to have it. So you can put in a summary. I'll just dummy this up. Tags. It's kind of like a hashtag, so you can find this later. And then you can do a feature type, or a tile, or a vector tile. Here's the difference. A feature is for vector data. A tile is for raster data. Okay, and I can upload this to my ArcGIS Online account, right? So I have all of these different files up here. I'm going to put this in the February. Let's create a new folder. So I'm going to call this new folder, let's see, Arc Pro Basics. And you can have a space in this. And you want to make it public to share with everyone, or just to the University of Idaho, or you can have this with a specific group defined by the groups that we'll talk about if you're joining tomorrow's workshop. And then you can go to analyze to see if there's any hiccups or data inconsistencies, case in point, the projection, and then publish this. Okay. This takes a bit of time, so I'm going to hold off hitting the button or the go button here, but that way you can share it to your ArcGIS Online account. You can do that also with vector data, right? To make it public there and accessible. So that's one way that you can create a compelling presentation data set with this. The other way to do it is by inserting what's called a layout. Okay, so up here at the top, I'll go to new layout. And I want this to be, say, for example, at a letter, right, size in landscape layout. Maybe I want to use this for a report or give this off to a city. So I have this set up, and I'll go ahead and once this is loaded up, I'll go to map frame. I'll go to my default extent, and I'm going to draw in what I want that map to be. Okay, with the map frame. Now that's in there. Now what I want to do is I want to zoom to Moscow, and I don't want to do that by hand or just roll in. So I right click and then go to zoom to layer, right, with a specific layer denoted. And there's my representation, right, on a map. Now I can start to bring in and add in north arrows and all the stuff that we're asked to include to make this all the cartographic features that make this a compelling data set. You can also add in legends, other references. You can add in titles, right? Credits, map frames, scales, right? A scale bar if you wanted to do that as well. If you also wanted to change the scale, you can right click and go to activate, right? And I can say, okay, I want this to be nominal. So I want to put this at 1 to 50,000. Hit okay there. Awesome, it's popping up. So that is going to be populated there, and I'll back out of this, and I can see that my scale that I've inserted here is popping up or retrofitting to that the new scale that I've set for that spatial extent. Awesome. I can add in a title, all that fun stuff. Now, once that's good to go, another thing that you can do is you can share this data set as a PDF, right? You can also put this as a presentation if you'd like. The way that you'll do that is you'll go to share up here at the top, and you can print this to a machine, right? Or you can also go to layout, and here you have PDF, and you can change the output as the image. You can change the quality in terms of if you don't want this as pixelated, you can also put it there. All kinds of fun stuff to get in this information and to export as a PDF. You can tile these as a report, whatever is useful for you. You can turn on and off layers so people can, inside of a PDF, they can turn off the feature classes if they want. Say, for example, if they wanted to turn off this boundary. Okay, so I know we went and covered over a lot of this information all too quickly, but the last thing that I want to show you all is for transferability. Let's see, we can actually do two things, I think. So for transferability, you can go to, like, for example, if I'm in my map tab, and this is kind of at the top, you have your map and your layout tab. If I wanted to share all of this data, all of the data and the project with someone, right, an employer or anything like that, including the history and also the layer or naming conventions and color conventions, you can go to share up here at the top, and you can create a map package, right, which is the map and also the all of the layers, or a project package. The project package is going to be all of the data, all of your layouts. If you have a model builder in here, and all that information, all the history, it's going to be inside of this. Okay. Let's see, and you also can share all of your geoprocessing tools if you wanted to do that as well. Okay. Let's see. So the other thing that I wanted to show before we jump to a brief, all too brief Q&A session, I wanted to showcase in terms of data kind of visualization is how to jump into 3D. Okay, so if we wanted to take this and then prop this up as a 3D representation and then potentially do a fly through, one way you can do that is by up here at the top, or this top ribbon, you can go to view, convert, and then to local scene. Okay, let's select that. That's going to convert it over. Get out of this magnifier. That's going to convert it over to a local scene. Okay, and this can be kind of finicky for navigation, but what you want to do is you want to select this show full control, and you can see that there's two different rings to be able to navigate around here. The second ring, if you grab from the bottom up and start to tilt that up, now you have elevation data associated with this. You can change the vertical exaggeration if you'd like. You can start to play around with the size. You can start to add in buildings, all of this, and you can most useful, you can navigate around and then also change the kind of the way that it's being displayed here. Something also that's a lot of people find useful is animations, right? So for example, if you have this set up and you wanted to create a fly through, right? One way that you can do that inside of View is if you go to this animation tab here, you go to Add, and you can create a keyframe, right? So you can say, okay, have this set up. Here's my first keyframe, and I'm going to start to tilt this up, right? And I'm going to zoom in just a hair, and then I'm going to add in a frame. And then I'm going to tilt this around. I'm going to rotate this over, right? Okay, and then I'm going to add in a frame. Okay, then I'm going to zoom in, to show people information about this, and then add in a frame. And then what you can do is you can play that back, and that's going to be a quick kind of fly through, if you wanted, of your site, right? This is a good way to show information in a different way than just showing people static maps. You can export that as a movie, right? As a movie file. So if you go up here to the top and click export movie, you can export that as a YouTube style setting, or YouTube settings. You can put that as HD 720 or 1080, which are going to be very heavy sometimes. The longer the video, the higher the resolution. You could have a file that ends up being 10 hours of rendering time, and you'll get a 10 gigabyte file, right? So you want to be careful about that and how you have these export settings set up. And that's usually by frames per second. Okay, so you can export this and put those links inside of embedded presentations, inside of Arc Hub sites, and then also story map sites. So that's what, in the next 2 days, if you're able to participate or even view the recordings for the next workshops, we'll talk about how to create ArcGIS Hub and user experiences, and then also some of these web application tools through ArcGIS Online, and then also story maps. So story maps are presentations as links where you can show people different information and different data sets about some of the issues that you're looking at in particular projects. But you can also embed maps, right? So that same data set that you all became all too familiar with inside of this workshop. So you have City of Moscow data, that walkability data that we produced earlier, urban heat island effect, or albedo, right, or impervious surfaces, and then the floodplain, right? And that has associated attributes, right? So people can select this data type and then start to see, oh, here's some information. Here's how big it is. Here's how many area acres it is, per this intervention that you're proposing, right, with your proposal. And you can share this to people as a web link. So in the next couple of days, if you're able to attend the talks that I'll give tomorrow, and then I believe on Wednesday, Bruce will give a talk about Arc Online tools, please do so, because we'll see some pretty effective and useful ways to convey data. All right, so thank you all for joining here for today. I know it's all too quick to jump to a lot of these tools, but what I would strongly recommend is reviewing the recording, right, and then breaking it down into smaller steps, and this can help you to get moving. If you look at the chat, you can also see there's a lot of useful information that Bruce has shared along the way, but feel free to review, and let's go ahead and feel free to review, and feel free to contact me with any questions that you may have. Cool. Well, thank you all for attending, and hope this has been useful for everybody.